It's great to have you back, and really happy that you decided on the spur of the moment to come in and talk a little bit about current events and tell me what's been going on in your life. Last week was quite well, how should I say it? Help me out here.
Well, thank you for having me back. And the perfect way to say that is, oh, oh, America. I mean, I knew it could go either way going in, right? Because, you know, Republicans vote Republican, and he was the top Republican, and he's been campaigning since he lost 4 years ago at this time. Even before he left office, he was already protesting and saying he was president, and then he started running again. And, the polls showed that he was going neck and neck with Harris. What I wasn't expecting was for him to actually pull it off, but it happened. So now what? Really, like, what's going to happen next? Because he's given us all the information so that we know. Because I watch Kamala's rallies and I watch some Trump rallies. Like, I try to go right to the source to see what he's saying. He's hard for me to listen to. Just the way he speaks, because he's kind of all over the place and he doesn't really go into details, and it's whatever, it's his way of entertaining people. But I do listen to what he says directly versus listening to other people, what they think he meant or what they think he said. So, I'm just really curious about a few things that are going to come up, like what's going to happen with mass deportations, what's going to happen with the justice system. We know he's probably going to get two more justices. What is the foreign policy fallout going to be? What are people going to think when they start to realize what his policies are? You know what I mean? We had a little off time, but I was with a friend last night who was a Republican, and I was saying, oh, yeah, we're talking about Trump, and he voted for Trump. And I said, oh, yeah, well, we're going to get rid of the Department of Education. Oklahoma is already preparing to just not have the federal government provide anything from the Department of Education because they're going to close it. He's like, they're going to close the Department of Education? I'm like, yes, it's in the plan. They said they were going to do it. It's on the agenda, and they're preparing for it, and they're going to do it. And he's like, what's going to happen to loans? And I'm like, I don't know. You tell me. What's going to happen to loans? What's going to happen, healthcare? RFK Jr. This guy loves meat. He's a meat eater, and he doesn't believe in facts and science and real things. And this podcast is about trying all these different things. But I think in some senses, when it comes to the FDA and things that govern people's medication that they get from the hospital, I think that needs to be very scientific. you know, there's just any direction you want to go in is going to look differently in this administration over the next 4 years. So that's really what I'm interested in watching for and trying to take away a silver lining. And I know this is tough because I am a staunch Democrat and a progressive at heart. And I believe that humanitarian efforts should come way before the needs of the wealthy and accelerating profits and those sort of things. So the silver lining, we will see change, and sometimes we resist change, but there are things that are going to change for the positive. I'm a crypto guy. I invest in crypto. I'm with crypto. Crypto went hard with Trump. Like, they're all in with Trump. All the top crypto CEOs and CFOs, they all are in with him. And they're all moving in that direction. He has Elon Musk. That guy is the face of Dogecoin besides the Shiba that's on it. So for me, the banking system may actually become better because I think crypto is a better holder of contracts. It's codified, it's mathematic, the transactions can't be faked or messed with afterwards. It's a push system versus a pull system, which is a whole nother thing. So maybe he's just, and this is the other thing they say, Trump, he's not really the type of guy that can stick to one thing for very long either. So if he says he's going to do mass deportations and you're expecting millions of people to be rounded up and shipped out, does he have the attention span to actually get it done? I don't know, maybe not. Maybe he's definitely going to disrupt people's lives compared to what's happening now. Now, right now, when ICE goes out and they're looking for someone who's been deported because of a criminal offense, they also get people that don't have criminal offenses that are undocumented, and they currently let them go. The undocumented people that they're not searching for, they let go. And they just take the ones that they're looking for specifically that have warrants and have gone through the judicial system. A judge has ruled that they're going to be deported for X, Y, and Z reasons. And they just take the one person and deport them. Whereas now it could be just a grab. We found this person, but this person was with them. So we're going to take this person too. And they didn't have any papers and their friend didn't have any papers, but their friend is actually a US citizen, perhaps, but don't have their license on them, and they just get swept up in the process because they didn't have their driver's license on them because they're, I don't know, walking down the street, walking their dog. I don't know. They could be
Well, it
doing anything,
certainly puts
really.
a lot of pressure on a lot of people that might be very bothered by just the threat of, like you're saying, it's like now I have to think about if now is a good time to go out and walk my dog instead of like trying to find a new job or whatever it is that will get you out there to get your life going. Besides the fact that probably if you're in that situation, you can't really afford to have a dog. But I'm interested in another aspect of the election. I spent a little bit more time online last week than I usually like to, and got myself into a little bit of hot water by pointing out something that Questlove Supreme, the great hip hop artist that is very outspoken politically in his Instagram, was posting about that this election really wasn't decided by the people who voted for Trump, but it was decided by the people that didn't go out and vote for Kamala, where the numbers are pretty telling that in 2020, Joe Biden won with 84 million votes against 71 million votes that Trump had. 74 million, I'm sorry. For this election, basically 20 million of those 84 million didn't show up. Kamala Harris got 64 million votes, and Trump also got 3 million votes less than in 2020. So essentially, if Kamala had pulled in all the votes that Joe Biden got in 2020, Trump would have lost by 13 million votes instead of 10 million votes like he did in the last election. So where were all those people? That's 1 out of 4 Democratic voters that decided they had something better to do than to perform their civic duty and show up at the post office and drop their ballot or mail it in or whatever. What were they thinking? How do you explain that? Do you have like a way to look at that?
An insight on why Americans didn't vote. I'm glad you brought it up because America has a culture that is very broad, right? And is very diverse. And we are a very entitled country. We're very lazy, I think, in a lot of respects. And everyone comes in at different times and sometimes do their civic duties and sometimes they just skate on them for whatever reason. And I think there was a big motivation coming out of 2020 with Trump and the pandemic where more people probably have more free time is part of it, right? To actually vote and to go out and do it. In 2020, a lot more people were engaged because the government controlled a lot more people's lives during the pandemic, right? What were you allowed to do, what you couldn't do, where you could go, what you had to wear a mask, all these different things, the vaccines and people dying. So I think people were more engaged with what was going on with the government. And honestly, the Biden administration has done a very good job of steadily bringing us back to somewhat of a normalcy. And we just had a soft landing on the economy. The Economist magazine just said that America has the best economy in the world. It's the envy of the world. Our foreign wars we're not directly participating in a lot of, like we were in Afghanistan during Bush and sending troops to Iraq and those sort of things. We're providing resources for Israel and for Ukraine. When things are fine for Americans, they just may not do their civic duty because that's the privilege of being an American, too. I mean, I can't tell you how many people I know that are just like, yeah, I don't think it matters because I live in this state or that state, so it's already decided for me. In Colorado, where I am, it took me about 3 hours to vote because there's 70 questions. There's agenda questions. You have to approve all the judges. There's 25 judges. Then you have the elected officials, ballot measures. It takes effort. And then you have to understand what you're voting for, which is more work. And you're not getting paid for it. Well, actually, you could win a lottery if you were on the Republican side this time. Elon Musk did give away $1 million for 10 days or something like that to people that signed up for his PAC or something like that, or his online petition for something. But yeah. So yeah, I would explain it as when Americans are more comfortable, they're more lazy. And this is the hardest part for me, and the part that I can't understand is we have to live with that decision of theirs, and we have to see what comes because I don't think people understand on any scale the kind of vindictiveness that Trump may have towards his political enemies. I'm worried about that. I'm worried about bloodshed and violence and the brutality. He talked about a purge at some point. And I don't think the American people are really, they're all like, oh, yeah, he's like a grandpa. He's like Grandpa Trump that's going to throw money around. And yeah, he's a little wacky here and there. And he wants to do a dance party when he should be answering questions. But, he's harmless. I don't see that. I see there's a great deal of harm to a very marginalized group of people that's going to take a very big, blunt blow. And I don't think the American
Mm.
public sees it
Yeah,
coming, but
that's
it's
really.
coming. And I hope he doesn't. I hope he's just a goofy goofball. And I want to trust that the 74 million people that think he's okay he's actually going to be okay. And I was naive enough the first time to think, hey, listen, okay, this guy's a disruptor. He's going to disrupt both sides. He's going to come in. He's going to do what he says he wants to do. He's going to do X, Y, and Z, get the economy going, shake it up with China, and do these things and not care what anybody thinks. But then he only cared about what the response was in social media. Like it was very personal and like he needed gratification and he needed other people to give him validity for what he was doing or praise. He couldn't take criticism. I thought he could come in and do some stuff. And this time, I have no illusions. He's just going to do things that are good for him. And the rest of us just have to deal with whatever comes our way. If you have kids and there's not as much money for education, then that's what you get, right? You have to deal with that. If you lose health care, then that's what's going to happen. If you didn't vote and you lose your health care, then that's what happens. If your friend is here on quasi terms and they get deported, I've heard stories last time that they deported someone's husband who wasn't, she was a documented immigrant, but he wasn't. And they took him and shipped him out. And she's like, I didn't realize I was going to lose my husband.
Yeah, that's some scary prospects right there. I got another couple of curveballs for you on that election, and then maybe we can move on at some point. But one thing is, I also have a Republican. I don't want to call him a Trump supporter, but he definitely was like, well, he's running for president, and I don't really see what's wrong with what he did last time so much. And he actually said something that really surprised me, hearing from a Republican supporter, where he said, well, when Trump was in power, he didn't start any wars, kind of implying that what's going on in Israel right now wouldn't be going on if the Democratic government hadn't let it run and kept sending money over there for them to bomb people that live on their territory. In the back of my head, that maybe 5 or 6 of those 20 million people who didn't vote might have done so because they were upset about inflation. The grocery stores get more expensive by the month. I was in Europe for 6 weeks this summer, and by the time I got back from my trip, the same basket of groceries that was costing me $40 before I left was suddenly $48. I've never experienced inflation in such a rate. So in the back of my mind, I also thought, yet maybe some people just didn't go vote because they were just they were not happy. They don't have a stock portfolio. They don't benefit from the economy flying to the skies. They have to pay more for their groceries and things like that. I don't know what gasoline is doing because I don't have a car. But so part of me was thinking, oh yeah, maybe they really wrote them a bill for not taking care of the small people, and also kind of feeling like, yeah, they have a way of getting themselves involved in wars. You were just saying, oh, yeah, we didn't deploy any troops anywhere, but sending billions of dollars to a government that will use that money to make more very functioning killing machines, as the Israelis are pretty good at making, um, might have upset some people too. But I don't want to stir any extra fires here. It's just something where I'd be interested in your perspective on that, because on the one hand, it seems like people are pretty complacent about that. On the other hand, I've met some people who are very upset about it. So I don't know if you want to elaborate a little bit.
Yeah, I think the people that complain about inflation didn't look at the actual numbers. I think they didn't do any research. They're just upset that they go to the grocery store, they hit the gas, that it's not a buck 50, right? Like people are cheap, right? But they're also lazy. I don't think the people that complain about inflation actually understand what's happening with inflation and coming out of the pandemic and what we were up against and where our inflation was at globally, us versus all the other countries, and where we're at now, right? Like they just didn't look, right? And they didn't look at the plans because number one, Trump only said that he was going to do tariffs and cut taxes for the wealthy, which he did before, which worked. How much money can we not get from the richest people in the world and still have a functioning government? I think is part of the problem. And then the other ones that if they said it's because Trump didn't enter any wars, we wouldn't have the situations that we have now. The reason why we have the situations we have now are for the exact same reasons and kind of a different idea for both. So, because when Trump was president, he was friends with Putin. Putin wasn't willing to do aggression because he wanted to do it more in a legal, semi quasi legal sort of way, etching away at people's rights and laws and institutions to pull countries in towards him, right? And then when Democrats are in power, he sees that there's no wiggle room because now you're strengthening NATO and the European Union and we're backing our partners. And so he gets aggressive and attacks, right? And I think what happened with Palestine and Israel is really about the way the Israeli government puts pressure on Palestine, and you can only put so much pressure on people before they snap, right? We can only take so much before someone does something about something, right? And I think the Israeli government puts more pressure on Palestine because they very much run it the same way that we have had colonization. They took the playbook right from the English and said, we're going to knock down people's houses, we're going to restrict rights, we're going to make people a certain level of citizens, we're going to have zones where people live, and we're going to constrict the whole thing. By a government for the Palestinians was installed, right? The Palestinians didn't vote the Israelis there. The English said, you have this. This is, you're here now, so you're in it together. So this is what's happening, right? But both of those situations are not America's fault. And Putin always wanted the Ukraine. He wants all of it back, right? That's Putin's goal, is to reunite the old Soviet Union. Israel's goal is to get rid of Palestine, and Palestine's goal is to exist in what used to be Palestine. Those wars, who's in power just determines how the other side is going to try to take what they want. So, and as far as the people who didn't vote, one way or the other, I think that there was a huge Palestinian movement to not vote, to boycott the vote. They would protest at Kamala's rallies, and she would address them and say, we want the war to end. We need a hostage deal, and we want a ceasefire, and we want to bring humanitarian aid. And I think what they don't realize is they never went to Trump rallies. I never saw a Trump rally that was disrupted by a Palestinian protest. And I think if that happens now, I think there's going to be a much different reaction from those that go there and who protest. I think they're going to get a much harsher reaction from the people they're protesting against. Palestine's in a lot more trouble now because I think Trump is just going to say, let Israel finish the job and do what it needs to do. We'll sort out the West Bank when it's all over. And I think that's the bloodshed that the American people don't understand is coming.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
one
part
thing
of it.
that worries me is that I heard rumors that Kushner is already eyeing out the nicest chunks of the Palestinian coastline to pull up some resorts so him and his friends can park their yachts right outside and walk up to their hotel rooms. But in that respect, I don't really feel like there's much to be gained for the people that are suffering so much right now. I could see how that situation might just escalate, like you were just saying. That's a really interesting perspective, man. It's nice to hear somebody talking so eloquently about it, being so well informed as you are. I have one more question that might be interesting to people who are listening from Europe or from other parts of the world that just don't get why the US has a two-party system, this weird electoral college that's going back to some time of the Pony Express when votes had to be brought in by a 3-day horse carrier in order for them to pull the votes together in Washington. Why is the US, that prides itself in being the biggest and foremost democracy and the knight in shining armor defending democracy everywhere else in the world, why does it still function on this antiquated system where a third party candidate can mess it up for the person that's supposed to be winning because there's no way of making a coalition between two parties or creating some other kind of equilibrium where the majority of the votes will actually decide who won the election. And that doesn't seem to be the case. It's the case this time where the electoral vote really didn't matter because of the amount of people that turned out for Trump and the amount of people that didn't turn up for Kamala. But I'm still like gobsmacked sometimes. So I'm thinking like, how can that be? How can two parties be a democracy? That's like having mom and dad and the priest has nothing to say. You know what I mean? You choose either you got this or you got that. So it always seems like every election I see, it seems to be the choice between two half committed, I don't want to say evils, but they all have their good side and their bad side, and in the end it evens out.
I think that's exactly what the American people would say. I had a conversation with a Republican friend last night. He says it's by design that we have two sides, right? One side, the Republican side, he would say would be interested in taking care of the rich and the middle class, and the Democratic side is for the marginalized, the poor, those people who are struggling. But I argue that the middle class is 50-50. Everyone wants the middle class. Everyone protects the middle class in their own way. The Republicans have their way of supporting the middle class by trickle down economics, and the Democrats want unions. The system in general is one side or the other. Now, as far as the Electoral College and why do we vote and then have swing states that matter more than others? Well, that really came out of the Civil War. And that system benefits the rich. So they're able to control a smaller population so that they can get the vote. So that's how Trump essentially won the first time is he won the
Mhm.
electoral college but didn't win the popular vote, right? And then the same thing with what happened, I think, with Al Gore and George Bush is won the popular. Oh, it happened with Hillary Clinton too. So Hillary Clinton, Al Gore, they won the popular vote but lost the electoral college. Al Gore was a little bit more detailed
The
with what happened with
charts.
Florida.
I remember that.
And
Them counting the charts on the voting machines. And it was such a good.
oh, right. Yeah. So, but there is a movement in America, and Colorado has voted for this for the state that our electoral votes, because the electoral votes are based on population, and so each state has a certain number of votes based on their population and size of the state. So that's fair, I think, to say that Colorado has X number and Pennsylvania has 19 and New Hampshire gets 3 and California gets however many California gets, Texas, But there's a movement in America where it's been on ballot initiatives on states that have ballot initiatives where our electoral votes will go to the popular, whoever wins the popular vote, that's where our electorals will go. So if enough states sign up for this policy, right, and we have, I think there's 11 states that have officially signed up for it, and there was another like 7, it was on the ballot this time around for whether or not they're going to go to this system. If we get enough states to sign up for their vote will go towards the popular vote, then it won't matter anymore. So there is a movement in America to make the popular vote the thing. It's just each state has to vote that they will give their electors to the popular. So Colorado is a state that has done it. And so it doesn't matter right now because there's not enough states involved in this lottery to actually make a difference, because we need something like 30, 35 states to be enrolled in
Well,
part of the
that's
electoral
encouraging, at
college.
least that there are
So
some initiatives that try to address these problems. The other thing that somebody brought up to me that seems equally unfair is that each state of the 50 states gets two senators, but some states have way more population than other states. So in the end, the Senate seems to be even more unfairly distributed in terms of the question of power, because if you have two senators from California that are representing, I don't know, something like 65 or 70 million people, and then you have two senators from a place like Idaho, where I guess maybe there's like 10 or 15 million people living there, it seems a little bit out of whack in terms of making decisions that concern 300 million people. But I guess that's something that we're not going to solve right here and right now.
I don't know if that needs solving actually, because the way that the government's set up with checks and balances. So the Senate has two senators per state so that each state has an equal voice in a body that makes decision on law, right? Whereas you have the House of Representatives, which is based on population. So California sends way more representatives to the House to debate policy and law than New Hampshire does. So you have the House that represents kind of that America per person, and then they have the Senate, which represents each state equally, so that Texas doesn't have, again, the same thing as they have in the House, a lot more representation. They're just saying, because the states often codify around a certain culture, right? Texas is very Republican and it's truck nuts and guns and country music, and California is like surfboards and rap. And when to make balance, to have an equal voice, I think that's why the founding fathers set it up like that. I've never argued whether or not that's. I've never seen a problem with it. I've never seen a problem with that system when politicians show up to work. There's two problems in American politicians for everyone outside of America. One is the money in politics is out of control. It's out of control, and there's way too much money that people can donate, can create super PACs, can blanket people's phones, and just the money that's in politics needs to go. And we also desperately need to shorten our political cycle from basically election to election to maybe a year. Like if we only focused on elections for 1 year in America, like the year of the election, that would be great. I know other countries, they have 6 month elections or 4 month elections or snap elections that happen within 90 days. And so I think those are the two biggest problems. One is how long we have to listen to people say that. I think that's really a part of why people didn't show up too, is because Trump really spent 4 years, and the Republican Party spent 4 years saying this is bad. Instead of, all right, we have 3 years to do work and work on shit and come together and make decisions, right? And to make people's lives better and to do our job. Instead, they spend too much time being distracted by their political reelection 2 years out from it. There's just, and it's not until they're like, I'm about to retire, that they actually just say,
Mm.
fuck it, and I'm going to
Well,
actually
I
do what
looked
I'm
at
going to
the
do.
numbers yesterday and did a little bit of a quick calculation. Apparently, the two parties, both sides, spend a whopping $15.5 billion on this election. And I put that into the calculator, and I came up with that if you would spread that out among 300 million Americans, where it's not 300 million Americans that vote. If we add up the numbers this time, we had like 130 million that went out and voted. If you would give that money to 300 million people, everybody would walk away with $50. If you would make a big pot with that money every election cycle, and we're saying, okay, everybody who shows up to vote gets a cut of this pot, you betcha that every single person that has the right to vote would show up and collect those $50. And suddenly they wouldn't complain about that it's a half hour to fill out that form, because that would still be, you know, they're still making $100 an hour to fill out a form for $50. You know what I mean?
I think that is the most brilliant way of putting it I've heard ever. The amount of money that they spend on campaigning, if we set aside a fund instead that says if you vote, you get a check, everyone would fucking vote.
Oh,
Everyone,
and
everyone,
imagine,
everyone would go get their $50. They want their government checks. People love government checks. Republicans, Democrats, independents, everyone loves government checks because you know you're not going to pay taxes on them because the government sent it to you and it's money that you get
but
that you didn't. So I think that is the most brilliant idea that we should campaign for the next 4 years. That instead of money going towards ads, money should just go into a
well,
pot.
you can
If you
take that
vote, you
even
get a check.
further. Where like if you tell people that if they don't show up, the people that show up, they don't get a particular sum, right? They're not getting $50. They're getting their percentage of the pot. So if you don't show up, the person that showed up will get more. You know, like in a case like 30 million showing up, everybody would have gotten upwards of $100 for showing up to vote. People would find out the next year that their neighbor got $120 to go vote, and they'd be like, fuck you, this time I'm going to vote. It's not because I need the money, it's so you don't get it. You know what I mean? Because that's the way people seem to tick in this country, where it's like it's not always about that I'm going to get mine, but
Oh,
it's
it's
also about like I'm going to make sure that you're not going to get yours, which is a little sad and in a way I find un-American, but it seems to be the underlying thing of the whole meme culture, and it's kind of like everything is based on grabbing attention and creating some kind of FOMO. So yeah, that would be the FOMO vote. You know what I mean? You
yeah.
got to get people to somehow make them feel that they're missing out on something if they don't show up.
Right. And I think that's what happened in 2020 because people saw the impact of government, right? People saw the way the pandemic started and they didn't like the way it was going, so they showed up, right? And people have to be motivated. That's the overall problems with the American election system now as it stands is it's just a ton of money for an endless amount of time and people don't focus on the real issues that I mean voter fraud and the things that the Republicans were saying was going to happen, they don't exist. It's a non-problem. People coming in as mules and pushing in 1,000 ballots in counties that are swing counties, that doesn't happen. People don't cross the border to vote. They don't spend thousands of dollars and make a treacherous journey to cross the border to do something very fucking illegal, which is vote, just to get kicked out because they're going to be found out immediately because the vetting system on the voting systems is much more complex than what people think it is, right? The people that run elections, they have access to more information than the internet has for people. So they can verify things a lot quicker and a lot simpler because they have more information, more data about people because it's the government that has the information. They don't have it on the public internet. The argument that focusing on false issues is a problem because it takes away from actually solving people's problems. People who are caregivers, right? Or the sandwich generation that has kids and parents that need help on both ends. They need child support, they need child care so they can go to work, and they also need senior care so that their parents they can't stay home and watch them. So what about their problems? What are we doing for them instead of arguing about something that doesn't even happen, which I think is frustrating for Americans like myself that want to see a more unified government and approach. We should build upon our progress. Like things don't work, sure, stop doing them, or if it's a waste of money, don't do them, right? But don't say, oh, okay, you guys, we brought healthcare into this new scope, into this new law. Let's not just rip it out. Let's see what works and what doesn't, what people like and what they don't, and then improve, right? And I don't think we have a culture that does that. I think we have a culture that's finger pointing and name calling. And I think that comes from leadership. And Trump is a finger pointer and a blame person. He's been driving politics for 10 years in this country. He started with Obama and a birther non issue. Obama is an American, will always be an American, born in America. It was the finger pointing, name calling that brought Trump recognition and credibility that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't
Mm-hmm.
really exist. And there's people in this country that the pronouns is a big issue for them. I think Republicans show up because Trump said there's boys and girls, and that's pretty much the long and short of it. And Democrats say where there's more people. So there's people that came out on the Republican side that are just sick of hearing about pronouns and having to be politically correct. They just want to say their fucking jokes and not be ridiculed for calling Puerto Rico a giant floating garbage fucking pile. They want to think they want you to laugh. They want you to be like, yeah, that's hilarious. Like you're referring to the one that's in the Pacific, that's the real problem, the environment, but let's throw it on an entire, segment of people. And, Puerto Ricans are garbage. Like Puerto Ricans are not garbage. They're wonderful people. I have friends who are Puerto Ricans. They're fabulous. Their food is fabulous. They know how to have fun and play music. And you know what I mean? They're joyful people, and they're also people that go to work, right? Like they are hardworking American people, and it's a hardworking culture. To call them garbages, that's just part of the brand that the Republicans enjoy. That's part of their pride is like American, and they don't want you to even bring up other cultures or go against their culture, their bubble of culture, whatever that
Mhm.
is, the white American culture, Christmas and the war on Christmas and those
Yeah,
sort of
whereas
ideas.
like the original culture of this continent has been basically suppressed and almost wiped out in the last 250 years, where I've been spending a little bit of time in the last few years with the people who are, I don't want to say I spend time with indigenous communities, but I've been in the vicinity of that culture a bit, and I feel that in some way, that's why I'm calling this the post-election powwow. I feel that there's a lot to be learned from the people that originally lived in this land in terms of how you can govern yourself without having too much central government authority and things like that. So if they are searching for a model to get less dependent on government, then they should be looking at the exact opposite from the culture that most Europeans were trying to get away from oppressive governments. That's why they came here. That's why they got on that boat for 3 months to travel over here. The grandparents and great great grandparents of the people who were the first generations of Americans, they were trying to get away from a king, from a Caesar, and those kind of situations. And then they basically wiped out the people that were living in a framework that was kind of what they were aspiring to. So it's a confused identity you guys are born with, I guess. Which kind of brings me to an idea I had last night, which is more on the humorous side because it's probably not possible anyway. But I was thinking about, oh, if I was going to form a third party, what would it be called? And then came up with this little wordplay where it would have to be a neutral party. And neutral, you could also write it as new trail, as in a trail like an American Indian indigenous trail. I think maybe we've spent 45 minutes on politics now. That's a pretty good chunk of time. I don't know if you have any concluding words for that subject, but for me, you answered some deep questions that I haven't been paying too much attention in the last few months because I knew that if I would, it would just drive me crazy. And I didn't have, I'm not a citizen yet, so I didn't have a vote. So I decided that the best I can do for the people around me is not to pay too much attention to something that I have no influence over. If you have some finishing words for this subject, I'll leave the floor to you. And then I would like to hear a little bit more about, maybe you can tell our listeners a little bit about how we actually met at Walters back in the day, and tell us about your new project on Instagram.
All right. So I will leave the politics on this note is we all wake up as Democrats the day after, and we have to decide what's next. What do we do as individuals? And I think, you know, there was a gut check moment on the Republican side after January 6th. There was a big shift away from kind of hanging the Trump flag out and being all proud of the Trump status and movement, the MAGA movement. I think people moved away from that at that moment for Republicans. And now as Democrats, we're in the same position where we just got stunned in an election. And now as individuals, we have to find a new way forward under this, what will be upside down from our view of how things should be done, and how do we move forward. So for me personally, as an artist, as employee who works in the world with the kombucha company, I have to think about the things that I spend my time and energy doing, uh, was doing to versus what I will do. I have projects, and I have the apron project where I make one apron a month for 10 years, and that's the piece. I also have a project that I started at the beginning of this decade, which was where I make one apron per year that's I make throughout the year. And that apron, the annual apron, as I call it, the first couple years I kind of, well, the first year I actually did it each month. I worked on a quilted patchwork for each month. And so each patch was about a month, and then that was the apron. And the following year, I did one with N95 masks. My way of moving forward is I'm going to start a new project under the scope of the Apron Artist Project. But instead of me making an apron annually, I'm going to ask the community, I'm going to reach out to people and say, will you make a swatch like one of my quilts, right? And it'll have a theme. This year's or next year's theme will be America, right? And I'm going to ask my friends, do you want me to send you a little kit with some cloth in it that you can express your feelings about America on and send it back to me? And I will make an apron at the end of the year out of all these little patches, or maybe it'll just be a quilt, it depending on the return. I have probably a list of 20 people that I'm going to ask directly, but then I'm going to put it on Instagram and see if people just want me to send them a kit, or if they want to be a community ambassador and get a kit with maybe 100 quilts in it, quilt swatches, fabric swatches, and distribute them to their community and bring it back. So my idea is to, as an artist moving forward, is to reach out and understand more about what people are thinking and what they're feeling around a theme, and bring it together, because I will have Republicans that I reach out to do this project, and I will have institutions, and I will have individuals across the spectrum working on this project. So I think for all of us that are feeling what's next, like, now's the time to look in the mirror, to think about what you can do that's good for the country and good for your neighbors and your community, and focus on those things. And hopefully that will translate down the road to a more nicer discourse in America. Maybe like we can not be so heated about subjects, rather say, okay, immigration, right? We're a country of immigrants. We need to have a process for people to come in safely and correctly, and B, we also need to have a secure border. And what does that look like, rather than being like, oh, let's just deport everyone that doesn't match, right, the aesthetic of the Republican Party, or the traditional American white society that's controlled government for the last 200 250 years, right? Like, having a white president, we've always had a white president except for Barack Obama, right? So, you know, it's holding on to that establishment. And I'm hoping to create a communication, a dialogue, to open up, to have a place where we can say, yeah, I don't want people having abortions because they just got pregnant, and they see it as a way of, you know, what do they call it? For abortions, when people, as a contraceptive, right? Like, I don't want people just to have sex and then get pregnant and then use an abortion as the means to stop it, right? But I very much know that abortion, women need to have that access. Like, they need that medical procedure at times for a number of reasons, and it should be their choice, and it should be between the doctor and the person. There also needs to be a little bit of structure around people that may abuse that, from a rights view, that abortion is abused by people that are just partying and then getting pregnant and getting rid of it, which is their view, which literally I talk to my Republican friends, and that's their view, is like, Abortion is just
Well,
a
most of them probably
contraceptive
know
that's
because they've
cruel,
done it
right?
before.
Well, they find one person that's had it for whatever reason, and then they point at that person and say, well, they had it because they were young, but they could have kept the kid and it would have been fine. But the female that was having the child at a young age didn't want, and her early 20s or late teens, to bring another life into the world. And that's very much their choice, you know? And they say, well, they shouldn't have been having sex. Well, I know a lot of young girls that don't really have a choice at times with guys that they're with at that age because
Yeah.
men are not mature at 20 years old.
Well, that's a
We're just
whole
not.
other barrel of
So,
fish, as they say. And, I don't know if that's the correct idiom for this, but it's definitely a big subject right there. And I'm sure it's going to come up quite a bit in the next 4 years. I'm just hoping that the people who are fighting for their rights will have the right words and the right means of law on their side, and work the best way to find a solution that can appease everybody. I had one short conversation on election night that may conclude this theme for us as well, where we were hanging out at Ornithology Jazz Club, and we were asking the bass player Diallo, what do you think is going to happen? And he said, I don't know. And no matter what's going to happen, we're going to have to keep moving forward. And that's what I think you were just saying. In the end, it's about moving forward and making the best of it and trying to start a dialogue. Don't just disappear in your room and cry into your pillow right now. Now's the time to go out and talk to people like you were doing last night with your Republican friend, and make them aware of who they voted in there, and maybe the resistance to those most extreme measures that we're seeing right now from the Project 25, or what it's called, can be, they can only be prevented by Republicans at this point, in coalition with the people who make them aware that those things are a problem. But they're not going to do it because, we're waiting around for them to suddenly start reading liberal news or something like that. That's not going to happen. So the only way into those hearts and minds is through conversation and through being open about that. Not everybody voted for the guy because they believe 150% in every word that he's saying, but they voted for their party, and they want to see their party run things for the next 4 years because they hope things are going to be better for them. And who can blame them? That's the way the world works.